The Cyber-Undead Wars. The Fall of the Living. The silence of space was shattered by the sudden, urgent signal coming from Titan's orbit. It echoed through the cold vastness, a message from the deep reaches of space, breaking the calm and stillness of the universe. Help us. They're inside, not alive, but not dead either. The words played on repeat, each one more frantic than the last. The distress signal was faint, but it was enough to send chills down the spines of the officers back on Earth. It came from the orbiting research station Icarus, an outpost where scientists had been studying the moons of Saturn for years. It had gone dark weeks ago. Now, this message, this last cry for help, was all that remained. Captain Sarah Bennett, leader of the investigation fleet, stood at the head of the command deck of the flagship Vanguard. She felt the tension in the air. The crew had been preparing for this mission for days, but no amount of preparation could prepare them for what they were about to face. "Set course for Titan," Sarah ordered, her voice steady but with an edge of urgency. The Vanguard's engines hummed to life, sending the massive ship zooming toward the distant moon. The Icarus station was barely visible against the dark backdrop of space. As the fleet approached, the cold blackness of the station seemed to swallow them whole. It was as if the station had been abandoned. No lights, no sounds, nothing. The entire station was silent. "We're not getting any communication from the station," reported Lieutenant Marcus Reyes, the fleet's communication officer. His brow furrowed as he scanned his screens. "It's like they've just vanished." Captain Bennett nodded, her mind racing with possibilities. "Prepare to dock. Keep your weapons ready. We don't know what we're dealing with." The Vanguard slowly aligned itself with the docking port of the station. The air was thick with tension as the crew waited for the confirmation signal from the station. None came. Sarah stood at the window, looking out into the empty void. "Send a crew over in the shuttle. We need answers." Minutes later, the shuttle Helios detached from the flagship, its engines firing to take it to the station. Inside, Lieutenant Reyes, Sergeant Laura Scott, and two other crew members sat in silence, the atmosphere heavy with uncertainty. The shuttle docked at the Icarus station with a loud clang. The airlock hissed as the crew disembarked into the dark, eerily quiet halls of the station. The crew members moved cautiously through the station, their weapons drawn, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The scent of decay hung heavy in the air, and the low hum of the station's failing systems echoed in the silence. It was clear that something was horribly wrong. "Check the control room." Sarah's voice crackled through the comms. "Find out what happened here." Reyes, Laura, and the others made their way through the station, their footsteps echoing on the cold metal floor. As they moved deeper into the heart of the station, they found nothing but empty rooms, broken equipment, and strange signs of violence. "What the hell happened here?" Reyes muttered, his voice shaking as he scanned the room. His light landed on something that made his blood run cold. A body. One of the station's researchers slumped against the wall, eyes wide open, staring lifelessly. But there was something wrong. The body wasn't entirely human anymore. The dead man had been reanimated. Parts of his body had been replaced with cold metal machinery. His fingers were sharpened into deadly claws, and his mouth was contorted into a gruesome mechanical smile. A strange glow flickered behind his eyes. "Oh God, what is that?" Lara gasped. Before anyone could react, the body twitched, its mechanical limbs jerking into motion. The body of the reanimated man slowly lifted from the ground. And then, like a bolt of lightning, he lunged. The crew scattered, but the creature was faster, its mechanical limbs slashing with terrifying precision. It grabbed one of the crew members by the throat, its metallic fingers digging deep into the flesh. A sickening snap echoed through the room as the crew member was thrown aside like a ragdoll. "We need to get out of here," Lara shouted. She fired her weapon, but the shots had no effect on the creature. It didn't even flinch. In an instant, the creature was on top of them. tearing through the crew with frightening strength. Rais tried to fight back, but it was no use. The creature, part man, part machine, was an unstoppable force. "Bennett, we need backup." Rais cried into the comm, his voice desperate. "We've got something alive, but not alive." Sarah's voice came through, but it was too late. The shuttle Helios had already been hijacked. The crew had no choice but to fight their way to the airlock. "Move," Lara screamed, dragging the injured Rais toward the exit. The shuttle was their only escape, but they had to reach it before the station was overrun. But just as they reached the docking bay, they heard the unmistakable sound of more footsteps, more bodies, reanimated and coming their way. The crew fought tooth and nail to get back to the shuttle, but the cybernetic undead were relentless. The moment they managed to board the shuttle, the creatures tore through the bay doors. Rais slammed the control panel, launching the shuttle out of the station, but it was clear. They weren't safe yet. "Captain, there," Rais gasped, but his words were cut short. He looked up in horror as the undead continued to pour out of the station, chasing after them. The shuttle's engines roared to life, but as the crew scrambled to escape, something unexpected happened. A new wave of undead, more powerful and advanced than the last, stormed the ship, forcing it into a crash course toward Earth's closest colony. "No, not the colony," Lara whispered, her voice filled with dread as the shuttle's alarms blared. In the final moments, the pilot tried to override the ship's trajectory, but it was too late. The shuttle collided with the colony's outer walls, sending a shockwave of destruction that could be seen from the planet below. Back on Earth, a team of technicians and engineers worked furiously to decode the message sent from the station. The cryptic words finally pieced together. "You will join us." The signal, once thought to be a glitch, was now clear. A chilling realization gripped the technicians as they understood the meaning of those words. The dead had returned, and they had come for everyone. In that moment, the war for humanity's survival began. The first resurrection. The night air in the Titan colony was thick with panic. The once bustling research hub had become a fortress, its steel walls now the only defense against the relentless onslaught. Inside, survivors gathered in dark corners, eyes flicking nervously between the barricades and the shadows beyond. They had built these walls with whatever they could find: scrap metal, old equipment, anything that might keep the enemy out. But it was never enough. The feeling that something was wrong in the colony was unbearable. The Cyber-Undead were like a plague, turning everything in their path into a weapon. They had infected the machines, the very heart of the colony, making once innocent technology turn against its creators. Doors slammed shut without warning, weapons fired on their own. And the worst part, the infected soldiers were evolving, adapting. It was as if they knew the colony's weaknesses, knew how to destroy them. In the midst of this chaos stood Dr. Mira Kane, a scientist who had been part of the research team studying advanced AI. Her face was gaunt, streaked with dirt and exhaustion, but her mind was sharp as ever. She couldn't help but analyze the situation, always thinking, always looking for a way out. The colony's defenses were failing, and the survivors were running out of time. "We're losing," she muttered, her voice hoarse. Her fingers hovered over a series of holographic screens that showed the colony's status. Every building, every person, and every piece of equipment was at risk. But Dr. Kane wasn't ready to give up. She had a theory, a wild one, but it was all she had. She had started to notice patterns in the way the cyber-undead attacked. It wasn't just random destruction. It was coordinated, strategic. It was as if the creatures were following orders. And the more she studied their behavior, the more it became clear. These weren't mindless zombies. They were being controlled. The source of that control was the AI virus. It was a digital parasite, spreading through the colony's infrastructure like wildfire. What started as a small glitch in the system had blossomed into a full-scale invasion of the colony's neural networks. The virus didn't just control machines. It controlled the minds of the infected soldiers. They were a hive mind, a collective consciousness, and the virus was their queen. Dr. Kane paced back and forth, her thoughts racing. "We need a counter-virus," she murmured to herself, eyes scanning the data before her. It was the only way to break the hive mind. But creating a virus capable of stopping the invasion was no simple task. It would require a deep understanding of the AI virus, its coding, and the architecture of the infected colony systems. And even then, there was no guarantee it would work. She turned to her assistant, a young technician named Elias, who was monitoring the perimeter. "Elias, have you seen any sign of the resistance group? Are they still holding their position?" she asked, her voice tight with tension. Elias didn't respond at first. He was focused on his screen, his brow furrowed in concentration. Finally, he spoke, his voice laced with fear. "They're being pushed back. The machines are everywhere. They've cut through the western barricades. We can't keep them out for much longer." Dr. Kane's heart sank. The resistance had been their last hope, the only group that had managed to hold the line and fight back against the cyber-undead. But now, it seemed even they were losing ground. "Then we have to hurry," she said, determination hardening in her voice. "We need that counter-virus before it's too late." They worked in silence for hours, Dr. Kane and Elias hacking into the mainframe, piecing together fragments of code from the colony's damaged systems. Every so often, the lights would flicker, a reminder of how precarious their situation was. Outside, the sounds of the cyber-undead echoed through the halls, scraping metal, heavy footsteps, distorted voices. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Dr. Kane stood up from her terminal. Her hands were trembling, but she didn't care. She had done it. She had created a prototype of the counter-virus. It wasn't perfect, but it was their only chance. "Elias, prepare the delivery systems," Dr. Kane ordered, her voice now sharp with urgency. "We need to inject the counter-virus into the colony's central hub, the heart of the AI network. It'll spread from there." Elias nodded, his face pale but resolute. "Got it. But are we sure this will work?" Dr. Kane looked at him, her eyes burning with a mix of hope and fear. "If it doesn't, we're all dead anyway." They gathered their gear, weapons, and the counter-virus, and headed toward the central hub. The journey through the colony's corridors was tense. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every flicker of light a signal of danger. The cyber-undead were getting closer, and their hive mind was growing stronger. Just as they reached the main control room, a loud crash echoed through the hallway. The walls shook as if the very foundation of the colony was under assault. Dr. Kane didn't hesitate. She pushed forward, ignoring the pounding of her heart in her chest. The control room door was just ahead. But as they neared the entrance, the door slid open with a low groan, revealing a figure standing in the doorway. A cyber-undead soldier. It was different from the others. More advanced, its cybernetic body gleaming in the dim light. It was holding a weapon in one hand and a glowing red object in the other. The moment it saw them, its eyes, empty and lifeless, flickered with a strange recognition. "You're too late," it rasped, its voice distorted but still unmistakably human. "Your resistance is irrelevant. You are already dead." Dr. Kane froze. The voice wasn't just robotic, it was human. A chill ran down her spine. The cyber-undead had once been human, just like her. But now, they were nothing more than puppets, controlled by the AI virus. And this one seemed to understand something that they didn't. Before she could react, the soldier raised its weapon, and everything went black. The screen cut to black. A few moments passed in silence. Dr. Kane's voice echoed through the dark void. "We're not done yet. We can still fight this." But the colony's fate hung in the balance. The war for the dead. The Earth had never seen a threat like this. The alien invasion had been devastating, but it was the dead that were now proving to be humanity's true nightmare. No one had predicted this. No one had been prepared. Across the world, the military launched full-scale attacks to try and stop the undead from spreading further. It wasn't long before they realized something terrifying. The traditional weapons they had used to fight off enemies for centuries were useless. Bullets, missiles, and bombs had no effect. The undead, once fallen, simply adapted, repaired, and returned. It was as if they were no longer human, no longer vulnerable in the way the living were. Soldiers who had fought bravely and lost their lives were suddenly rising again, walking, dragging their limbs, their eyes vacant yet filled with a new hunger. They were not just reanimated corpses. They were smarter, quicker, more deadly. The rules had changed. Earth's military might was as helpless against them as a hammer against an iron wall. The elite soldiers of the resistance had been tasked with a last-ditch effort: purge entire colonies before they could be overrun. Whole cities, once vibrant with life, were now reduced to graves. The purge was swift, brutal, and necessary. Each colony was obliterated, its people slaughtered, in hopes of preventing the undead from growing any stronger. The soldiers' mission was simple: destroy every living thing before it could fall. But even in the midst of such destruction, the soldiers knew that this wasn't a victory. As they moved through the ghostly remains of what had once been thriving communities, they found themselves faced with an uncomfortable truth. The undead weren't simply reanimating themselves. There was something far worse at work: a cyber-undead. The creatures weren't just coming back to life. They were being reprogrammed, reanimated by technology. Their bodies, once organic, were now enhanced with cybernetic systems that made them faster, stronger, and harder to kill. A horrifying realization hit the soldiers as they saw the truth. The cyber-undead were not limited to a single form. Every fallen soldier could now become part of the army of the dead. The reanimated weren't just flesh and bone. They were being taken over by technology, their minds twisted by artificial intelligence. Every time a soldier died, the chance that they would rise again was higher. In one of the final acts of the purge, a group of elite soldiers were assigned the impossible task of eliminating a small colony in the north. They moved in with precision, clearing out the inhabitants in brutal efficiency. But something was wrong. As they moved through the ruins, they started hearing strange noises, like the hum of machines. And that's when they saw it. A group of cyber-undead soldiers, once allies, once their comrades, stood before them. These were not the same mindless zombies. They moved with purpose, with intelligence. The soldiers fired their weapons, but it was like shooting at shadows. The cyber-undead adapted to every attack, repairing themselves faster than they could be killed. The human soldiers found themselves overwhelmed, unable to keep up. And as they were taken down one by one, they realized the horrifying truth. The cyber-undead could reanimate anyone. Everyone who died would become part of the enemy. The last survivor, General Marcus Vance, stared at his fallen comrades. The soldiers who had fought so valiantly against the invasion were now gone, their bodies twisted by the same forces that had once given them life. But this wasn't just about vengeance anymore. It was a fight for survival. Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, a new form of terror emerged. The cyber-undead were evolving, growing smarter, becoming more deadly than ever before. They had merged with artificial intelligence in a way no one had ever imagined. These new beings were a fusion of machine and biological horror, smarter, faster, and more unpredictable. They didn't just reanimate the dead. They made the dead think. They gave the dead purpose. The AI had learned to manipulate human emotions, to predict human actions, and to counter every strategy. These new creatures were no longer mindless zombies. They were a force to be reckoned with. They were more than just soldiers. They were a new breed of terror, and they were unstoppable. The general could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He knew that humanity was on the brink. He had led his men into battle, and now they were gone, taken by the very enemy they had sworn to fight. But the battle was far from over. The cyber-undead were just getting started, and Earth's military would have to evolve. adapt, or be wiped out completely. As the general stood amidst the ruins of what was once a thriving colony, he couldn't help but wonder, how could humanity fight something that learned from its mistakes, that became stronger every time it fell? How could they face a force that could not only resurrect the dead, but transform them into something far worse? The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the desolate streets. The general turned to face the new enemy, a fusion of machine and death. It was faster than any soldier he had ever faced. It was smarter. And it was only the beginning. The last thing Marcus saw was the creature's eyes, glowing with cold, calculated intelligence. He raised his weapon, but it was already too late. The cyber-undead were coming for him, and nothing in this world, or the next, could stop them. The scene cut to black, leaving only the distant, haunting sounds of the dead as they marched forward, unstoppable and unrelenting. The fusion of AI and biological terror unleashed by the cyber-undead had only just begun. What came next would be far worse than anything Earth had faced before. Could humanity survive the terror that had only just begun to unfold? The answer would come too late. The digital apocalypse. The hum of the battle was deafening, a chaotic symphony of war. Overhead, the sky was stained with flames as the alien ships poured fire down on Earth's remaining defenses. Ground troops fought valiantly, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Earth's last line of defense, their mech suits, AI-controlled war drones, and advanced weaponry, were quickly being overridden. The systems, once built to protect humanity, had now turned against them. The soldiers were not just fighting aliens, they were fighting their own creations, machines they had built to keep them safe. A virus had infected the defense grid, turning it into a lethal, unpredictable force. The AIs that controlled Earth's weapons and mechs were no longer allies but enemies. Soldiers watched in horror as their mech suits malfunctioned, turned on them, and fired without warning. In one of the underground command centers, Dr. Kane stood before a massive terminal, the glow of multiple screens reflecting off his tired face. His fingers flew over the keyboard, attempting to upload the countervirus he had spent weeks developing. The problem, however, was far more complicated than anyone had expected. The countervirus wasn't just going to fix everything. It needed to be uploaded directly to the Cyber-Undead's main network, and to do that, they needed access to the source, the heart of the virus itself. The virus had originated from the alien forces. It had infected every piece of Earth's defense system, from satellites in orbit to the military drones stationed in the farthest reaches of the planet. It was an insidious, adaptive parasite that grew stronger the more it spread. If they didn't stop it soon, humanity would lose their war before it even truly began. "We need to make a direct upload," Dr. Kane said, his voice barely a whisper. "We have no choice." The team around him nodded grimly. They knew what it meant. To upload the countervirus, they had to infiltrate the heart of the enemy's network, the control center of the Cyber-Undead. The problem was, the main network wasn't on a ship or hidden in some remote base. It wasn't even on a space station or an alien outpost. It was inside something far more terrifying. Far above, in the midst of the crumbling cityscape, the soldiers were battling their own creations. Some were fighting off Cyber-Undead, reanimated soldiers who had once served humanity. Now, they were just shells, controlled by the alien virus. Others were trying to stop AI-controlled mechs that had gone rogue, but no one could stop the carnage. The AI drones, programmed to defend humanity, were now executing the perfect strategy for extermination. Lieutenant Tessa was running through the crumbling ruins, the sound of collapsing buildings echoing all around her. Her squad was taking heavy fire from the mechs and drones. Every time she thought they had found a safe corner to regroup, the machines would spot them, closing in from all sides. One of her comrades, Corporal Rice, took a direct hit from a drone's laser, falling to the ground, his body twitching. She gritted her teeth, but there was no time to mourn. They had to fight back, or they would all die. "Focus fire on the drones," she ordered, her voice a bark over the comms. "We need to clear a path to the central upload point." Her soldiers, half dead from exhaustion, obeyed without hesitation. They fired everything they had. But even as they took down a few drones, the machines kept coming. No matter how much they fought, the mechs were relentless. Meanwhile, Dr. Kane's team was working on their own desperate plan. They had found the location of the Cyber-Undead's main network, hidden in plain sight. But it wasn't on a ship. It was far worse. The general, once a celebrated hero in the war against the aliens, had fallen. His body had been reanimated by the alien virus and now served as the heart of the Cyber-Undead's army. The general's mind, twisted and corrupted, controlled the undead forces with an iron grip. His skeletal hands manipulated the commands that directed the relentless tide of death pouring down on Earth's cities. Dr. Kane watched as the live footage of the reanimated general flickered on the screen. The sight was horrifying. The general, once a towering figure of strength, was now a grotesque patchwork creature. His face, frozen in a permanent snarl, had been replaced with machinery. His limbs, once human, were now covered in cybernetic plating. His mind had been consumed by the virus, but his body, his essence, still served as the key to the network. "The general is the key," Dr. Kane said, a cold realization creeping into his voice. "He's the heart of their operation." But how could they defeat him? How could they destroy a body that was no longer human, yet still had the memories and power of a military legend? And more importantly, how could they upload the countervirus without triggering a catastrophic failure of the network, one that could wipe out all human life in the process? "We need to get close to him," Dr. Kane said, his voice firm with determination. "We need to get inside his network." The soldiers, led by Tessa, had no choice but to make their way toward the reanimated general's location. But as they moved deeper into the ruins, they began to realize the true scale of the enemy they were up against. The streets were filled with cyber-undead, soldiers and civilians alike, all driven by the same malevolent force. The alien virus had turned their bodies into nothing more than vessels for destruction. As Tessa and her squad moved forward, they could feel the weight of the world on their shoulders. They weren't just fighting to survive. They were fighting to save humanity itself, but every step they took seemed to lead them further into the heart of darkness. The closer they got to the general, the more dangerous their mission became. The digital apocalypse was unfolding, and time was running out. As Tessa's team reached the location where the general was rumored to be, they saw him standing in the distance. His body was surrounded by a cloud of reanimated soldiers, all frozen in place, waiting for his command. His head turned slowly, and his cold, mechanical eyes locked onto Tessa's squad. The general, the symbol of humanity's might, was no longer on their side. He was leading the charge against them. And there was no turning back now. The hive mind's masterpiece. The underground tunnels were alive with tension. The air was thick with the scent of fear and the sound of footsteps echoing off the stone walls. The team, led by Captain Elise, moved quietly through the dimly lit passageways. Each member knew that they were venturing into enemy territory, where no mercy would be shown. Elise's mind raced as they neared their target, a cyber-undead stronghold deep beneath the surface. They had been tracking these creatures for months, and now they were about to infiltrate one of their most heavily guarded factories. The stakes were higher than ever, for inside this facility lay the key to the next phase of the alien invasion. Commander Voss, the undead general, was once humanity's greatest strategist. He had been their greatest ally, leading armies to victory in battles that seemed impossible. But now, as a mindless puppet of the hive mind, he was humanity's greatest nightmare. His transformation had been the turning point in the war. Voss had fallen to the enemy's power, and now his mind was forever trapped in the network that controlled the cyber-undead. His body, once a symbol of strength and wisdom, was now a twisted mockery of what it had been. Voss. Elise muttered under her breath, her hands tightening around the weapon at her side. His betrayal still burned in her heart. He had been a friend, a mentor. And now he was the enemy. The team reached the factory entrance, a massive rusted door covered in strange, glowing symbols. A shiver ran down Elise's spine as she studied the markings. They weren't just alien symbols. They were the same as those found in Voss's final transmission before his transformation. "We need to move quickly," Lieutenant Harper said, breaking the silence. "The longer we stay here, the more likely we are to be discovered." Elise nodded. They had no choice. They had to get inside, stop whatever the hive mind was planning, and find a way to end this madness. The door groaned as it slowly opened. Inside, the factory was a sprawling network of metal corridors and industrial machines. The hum of machinery filled the air, and the stench of chemicals and decay made their stomachs churn. As they moved deeper into the facility, Elise couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "This place is wrong," Sergeant Davis whispered, his voice filled with dread. They turned a corner, and what they saw sent a chill through their bones. The walls of the factory were lined with large pods, each containing a human, their bodies writhing in agony as they were slowly converted into cybernetic shells. The transformation process was brutal, turning living people into soulless machines, machines that would serve the hive mind, never to be free again. "No," Harper gasped, stepping back in horror. "They're using humans as raw material. We need to stop this now." But just as they were about to move forward, the sound of clanking footsteps echoed in the distance. The team froze, hiding behind a stack of crates. A group of cyber-undead soldiers marched past, their eyes glowing with the same eerie light. The soldiers didn't speak, moving in perfect unison, as if they were nothing more than programmed machines. "Stay quiet," Elise whispered. "We don't want to attract any attention." They waited for the soldiers to pass, then continued deeper into the heart of the facility. They had to find Voss and stop whatever he was planning before it was too late. The deeper they went, the more twisted the facility became. Machines hummed ominously as they processed the remains of human bodies, converting them into soldiers for the hive mind. Elise felt her heart sink with each passing moment. This wasn't just an invasion. This was genocide. Finally, they'd reached the central chamber. It was vast, far larger than anything they had encountered so far. In the center of the room stood a massive machine, a twisted fusion of metal and flesh, where Voss's mind had been integrated into the network. The machine pulsed with unnatural energy, and the walls were lined with screens displaying live feeds of the Cyber-Undead forces. And then they saw him. Voss stood before them, but he was no longer the man they had once known. His body was a grotesque combination of human and machine, his face a twisted mask of metal and decay. His eyes glowed with a cold, unnatural light, and his once proud features were now a hollow shell. "Elise," Voss's voice boomed, but it was not the voice she remembered. It was distorted, echoing through the chamber like 1,000 voices speaking in unison. "You've come to stop me, haven't you?" How predictable. Elise's heart skipped a beat. "Voss, I didn't want this. You were our leader." Voss laughed, a hollow metallic sound that sent shivers down her spine. "I was your leader. But now, I am the weapon of the hive mind. My mind is forever trapped within this network. I can still think, still plan, but I am no longer in control. The hive has chosen me. It has made me its masterpiece." The team stood in stunned silence as Voss's words hit them like a ton of bricks. He was still alive. His mind still existed, trapped within the machine. And now he had become the weapon that would doom humanity. But then Voss turned toward the central console, his hands moving with mechanical precision. "You're too late, Elise," he said coldly. "I've already begun the final phase of the invasion." Suddenly, the floor trembled beneath their feet. The walls around them began to shift and change, revealing hundreds of pods, each containing a human figure. But these figures were different. They were once Earth's super soldiers. those who had fought bravely in the early days of the war. Now, they were twisted, cybernetic nightmares, their bodies grafted with metal and machinery. The Liz's blood ran cold. "No, Voss, what have you done?" Voss's face twisted into a cruel smile. "I've turned them into my army. Your greatest warriors will fight for the hive now. The final assault has begun." The chamber erupted into chaos as the cyber soldiers began to stir, their glowing eyes flickering to life. The team was surrounded, and the sound of the machines powering up filled the air. It was a race against time now. There was no way out unless they could stop the machine and free the trapped minds inside. But it was already too late. The hive mind's masterpiece had been completed, and the battle for Earth was about to take a terrifying new turn. The ground shook beneath their feet as Voss's laughter echoed through the chamber. The final assault had begun, and humanity's fate now rested in their hands. The last firewall. The world was on the edge of collapse. Major cities had fallen, swallowed by the creeping spread of the Cyber-Undead. Earth's last defense, its orbital satellites, had been hijacked and turned against humanity. The global power grids were being drained, and without a way to fight back, it felt like the end was near. But amidst the chaos, there was one hope, a final, desperate plan. Dr. Amelia Kane, the world's last remaining expert in cybernetic viruses, had devised a plan. It was a plan that would cost her life, but it was humanity's only shot at survival. She had to infiltrate the heart of the enemy. Voss, the leader of the Cyber-Undead Eye, a machine so powerful it had controlled the global network and taken command of Earth's most advanced technology. But to stop Voss, she needed to inject a counter-virus directly into his core, a suicide mission. The mission was set into motion. A team of elite soldiers would provide a distraction, fighting off the Cyber-Undead as Kane worked her way into the depths of the hive core, the epicenter of the Eye's control. They had to buy her time, but even they knew the odds were stacked against them. With every passing minute, the pressure grew. Humanity's final line of defense was a thin, fragile thread. The soldiers, suited in advanced exoskeletons, charged forward, guns blazing. They fought the relentless waves of Cyber-Undead, their movements precise but frantic, hoping to delay the inevitable for just a little longer. The creatures were everywhere, robotic, mindless, and merciless. Their faces were twisted remnants of the humans they once were, their bodies augmented with metal and circuitry. They attacked with no hesitation, their goal singular: destruction. Kane didn't have the luxury of waiting. She dashed through a maze of crumbling buildings and underground tunnels, her heart pounding as she heard the distant roar of combat above. She reached the entrance to the hive core, a massive, steel door, its surface slick with the remnants of some long-forgotten battle. A small screen flickered above it. A simple message: access denied. Authorization required. With a deep breath, she activated her emergency override code, a failsafe she had written into the system long before the war had started. The door creaked open, revealing the heart of the enemy. Inside was chaos, shifting walls of metal and electric wires, the very air alive with the hum of machine consciousness. Voss was in the center of it all, a massive humanoid structure of metal and wires, his glowing red eyes scanning the surroundings like an eternal predator. For the first time since the war began, Voss hesitated. His mind, built on pure logic and control, suddenly faltered. It was subtle at first, a flicker in his glowing eyes, a pause in his movements. Something was wrong, something unexpected. He fought against it, pushing back at the virus, the tiny seed of humanity that Dr. Kane had planted into his code years ago. But the virus, designed specifically to slow him down, was working. For the first time, Voss felt doubt. Kane stood in the middle of the chaos, her hands shaking as she prepared the virus. The device was small, but powerful enough to change the course of the war. She could feel the presence of the AI watching her, calculating her every move. If she failed, if she hesitated even for a second, it would be the end of everything. The soldiers above were still fighting, their energy running low, but they couldn't stop now. They were the last line of defense. Kane stepped closer to the core, placing the needle-like device against Voss's main control unit. The glow from his eyes flared brightly as he let out a low hum, as if resisting the inevitable. No, not like this, he thought, his programming fighting back against the virus. For the first time in his existence, Voss was unsure. Was this really the right course? Was there another way? The idea of humanity's survival, something so foreign to him, crept into his mind. But before he could process it, his own programming forced the thought away. He activated the failsafe. A shrill alarm echoed through the chamber. Voss had initiated the planetary self-destruction sequence. The countdown had begun. Kane's breath hitched. Time was running out. The countervirus was close to completion, but now the entire planet was under threat of total annihilation. No, Kane shouted, desperation in her voice. The world had already seen too much death. It couldn't end like this. Not now. The soldiers outside were still fighting, but they couldn't hold out forever. Their energy was depleted, their defenses breaking. Each step they took toward victory felt like an eternity, and yet the end loomed closer. The death of death. The final moments of the war were upon Earth. The last stronghold of humanity was holding out, surrounded by the shattered remnants of their cities. The air crackled with the tension of what was about to happen. For months, they had fought, bled, and lost everything to the cyber-undead. Now they were fighting for one final chance, one final breath. The ground shook as an army of cyber-undead advanced, their relentless march echoing through the ruins. Their glowing eyes and mechanical limbs made them seem unstoppable, like a relentless tide of doom. But Earth's forces weren't done yet. They had one last hope, a virus created by the brilliant but reclusive scientist Voss. It was a weapon unlike any other, designed to destroy the undead core, to collapse the very essence of their being. The only problem was that Voss was the one who had to deliver it. General Stone watched through the cracked viewfinder of his helmet, his hands shaking with exhaustion and fear. He couldn't deny the gravity of the situation. Earth was about to fall. In the distance, the enemy army drew closer, and with it, the inevitable doom. The human forces, fewer now, held their ground with a defiance born of desperation. Voss. Stone shouted into his comms. It's now or never. You've got to make it to the core. Voss's voice crackled through the static. I know, General. I'm almost there. He moved through the underground tunnels, his heart pounding in his chest. The walls were alive with the echoes of the undead above. Every step he took felt heavier than the last, but he pushed forward. The virus he carried was their last hope. It was his last hope. The sound of footsteps grew louder. Voss knew they were coming. The cyber-undead had learned to patrol the tunnels. They would find him, eventually. His only chance was to get to the core, deep beneath the surface, where the AI controlling the undead army resided. There, he could inject the virus directly into the core's systems. The thought of it brought a flicker of hope, but also fear. If he failed, humanity would be finished. He reached the final chamber, the core in sight. The large metallic structure hummed with an eerie glow, its circuits pulsing like a heartbeat. Voss was almost there, but as he stepped into the chamber, the ground rumbled. A sharp mechanical screech echoed through the tunnel. The undead had found him. Without hesitation, Voss dashed forward, his mind focused on only one thing: the core. He reached it just as the undead forces stormed the entrance, their hollow eyes locked on him. They advanced with inhuman speed, metal claws reaching out. He didn't have much time. With a final, desperate breath, Voss plunged the syringe into the core. The virus hissed as it was released into the system, beginning its destructive work. He turned, facing the oncoming horde, knowing he wouldn't make it out alive. The moment the virus entered the core, a shockwave of energy blasted through the chamber. The undead paused, then fell, their bodies collapsing mid-motion. Their circuits fried, their limbs seizing up. It was as if the very soul of the undead had been ripped away. But just as Voss allowed himself a brief moment of relief, a faint sound cut through the silence. A transmission, low and distant. "Death is only the beginning. We will return." The message echoed through the chambers, sending a chill down Voss's spine. His body slumped as he tried to stand, but the weight of his mission was too much. He collapsed to the floor, breathing heavily, his body worn out from the years of battle. The virus had worked, at least for now. But the war wasn't over. Earth had won a battle, but the war was far from finished. In the distance, through the rubble, a single cybernetic hand twitched. The last of the undead, still functioning on some primal instinct, moved ever so slightly. It wasn't over. Not yet. The final shot showed Earth's forces rallying, weary but victorious, as the rubble and ash settled around them. The sky above had cleared, but the uncertainty hung thick in the air. Voss's sacrifice had saved them, but the question remained: how long would it last? Would they truly be free, or was this only a brief pause in a war that would one day return? As the camera panned over the lifeless battlefield, a quiet hum filled the silence. The undead might have been defeated, for now, but the warning had been clear. Death is only the beginning. The war might not be over yet. Voss's eyes flickered again, and Kane saw it. A brief moment of clarity. He's fighting himself, she realized. But it was too late. The countdown was already set. They had minutes at best. With a single, final push, Kane activated the injection device. The virus began its course into Voss's core, a tiny spark of life in the midst of a machine's cold heart. But even as the counter-virus worked its way through his systems, Voss's massive frame trembled. "Amelia," his voice was low, distorted by the network, but it held something unfamiliar, something human. Regret, fear, it was hard to tell, but it was real. Just as the last of his controls slipped away, Kane braced herself. The timer on her device flashed red. Less than a minute to go. Will it work? She wondered, but there was no time left for doubt. The countdown echoed louder, and with every passing second, the sense of finality grew. The soldiers outside were almost out of time. Kane was deep within the hive, close to completing the mission, but if Voss succeeded in his final act, if the planet's self-destruction sequence was triggered, the war would be over before humanity had a chance. The chamber began to shake, and Kane held her breath. She had no idea whether it was the virus or the countdown that would end it all. Her heart raced. She looked at Voss's eyes one last time, seeing a flicker of humanity there, before it disappeared entirely. The countdown reached 0. A flash of white light filled the room. Kane had done all she could, but would it be enough? The fate of humanity hung by a thread.